Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Dennis Prager Show. Every so often, you get to meet, or at least to talk to, I have been fortunate in both cases, a truly distinguished human being. And I have him on the line, and I don't want to embarrass him with compliments. Anyway, I might prejudice what he has to say. So I'll just give you a very quick bio. Zuhdi Jasser, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, is president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. And there's a good chance you have seen him on any of the television networks. And he has written just now a book up at DennisPrager.com, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. He served in the U.S. Navy. And he loves America, and he loves his religion. And if there is a chance for a beautiful Islam, I think that Zuhdi Jasser represents it. He is a medical doctor in internal medicine. And Zuhdi, welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show.
Dennis, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me back.
Well, this is the $64,000 question, what you write about here, and that is the battle for the soul of Islam. Let's begin with a news question. How do you regard the victory of an Islamist in the presidential election in Egypt?
Well, the short term is that I'm very fearful. The Islamists will often say whatever they need to placate the West and the free world, but ultimately they have no proven track record of ever recognizing clearly the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and minorities from the Coptics in Egypt to women and others, I think, have a lot to be concerned about. But ultimately, none of us are surprised that have been dealing with this and following it for some time. Like my family came out of Syria, we know the lay of the land there, and you will not be able to. The revolution, I think, there was a sign of something new. It was an awakening. It certainly wasn't a spring, but it was an awakening. And you need time to develop new infrastructures for liberty and freedom. And it's not a surprise that the final two candidates in Egypt were the old, the secular fascism of Mubarak and his history, and versus the theocracy of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the secularists, the liberal Democrats, weren't able to get enough traction within barely a year, and having been living under oppression for so long.
Let's work on. I wrote about this in my book because there's a giant section on Islam and Islamism. I gave mine, but I won't say it right now. I'll say it after yours. What is the difference between Islam and Islamism?
I think it's pretty simple. Is that Islam, to me, is my communication with God. It's a personal spiritual path in which includes prayer and worship and values of humanity and honesty and integrity and family values. Islamism is no different than socialism or communism, and it's a political movement that penetrates government and empowers clerics that uses the instrument of that political movement, Sharia or Islamic law, and therefore Islamic law is not a source of law, but the source of law for Islamists. So if you look at the Muslim Brotherhood's platform as a party, you'll learn what Islamism is. It may deceptively look democratic because they use the ballot box and others, but they don't believe in natural law, and they don't believe that rights come from God per se, but rather from Islam and the cleric's interpretation of them.
So here's the question then. I subscribe to that. In my book, I just give the very and I think it's the same, but tell me how you react. I define Islamism as any movement to make Sharia the law of the land.
Yes, I don't disagree with that.
So here's then here's the question. Then how have historically Islam and Islamism differed, because that has been mainstream Islam to make Sharia the law of the land?
I would tell you that it's mainstream clerical Islam, in which the religious institutions have certainly not separated mosque and state and gone through an enlightenment. And I hope that's what my book offers, is some hope to people that a devout Muslim can separate mosque and state. But just as Christianity and the West took 1,789 years until they had a constitution with an establishment clause. I think similarly, Islam needs a lay movement, intellectual lay movement to separate that. Even in Egypt, though the Islamists won, initially when you had 15, 20 parties, the Islamists only had 20, 25% of the vote. So Muslims, even in majority Muslim countries, will reject Islamists through plebiscites and a regular vote. But then when you have these runoff-type elections and when the Islamists are so unified and organized under one party versus all the non-Islamists get divided into 10, 20 different parties from left to right, you end up, as you see in Tunisia and now in Egypt, the Islamists will win a plurality.
I might add, ladies and gentlemen, my dear listeners, that I have included Dr. Jasser in my book as an example. I give about 5, an example of Muslims who are reforming Islam, and you'll tell me if you find that phrase acceptable, and that I do believe that an Islam that can live at peace with its neighbors will largely come from America. Are you comfortable with what I just said?
Absolutely. Not only largely. You know, my book is a call to action for American Muslims and non-Muslims. And, you know, thank you for your book also, Dennis. I think ours complement one another when you talk about the best hope. And America is the best hope for humanity because I can do, as much as, yes, I've been attacked and even some threats on my life, etc., it's marginal compared to what Muslims go through in Egypt and Syria and elsewhere that are reformers, that are pushing back against the Wahhabi interests, the petrodollars, the clerics at Al-Azhar who want to stranglehold any type of reform. So at the end of the day, we have a laboratory here in America in which we've lived it. And all we need to do is, and this is why books are so important. You know, Muslims can talk about reform, but until you can pull books off a shelf that talk about liberty, that talk about separating mosque and state, and that's why at the end of my book, I have a letter to my children in which I tell them that our legacy, this is about legacy, and if you want America to continue to succeed and for us to feel comfortable and America to continue to promote liberalism, classical liberalism globally, we have to figure out how Muslims, who are a quarter of the world's population, can come to terms with modernity. And it has to be done intellectually, debating the imams and marginalizing these ideas through the open space. And that's why even though I'm concerned about the Brotherhood win, we can only defeat these guys openly. By pushing them underground, we'll actually lose, and they always end up winning.
The book is A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, Jasser. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. This might turn out to be one of those life-changing, even world-changing books, because we non-Muslims, the whole world, Muslims and non-Muslims, have a stake, have an enormous stake in Zuhdi Jasser and Muslims like him succeeding. So I can't it's not possible to overstate the significance of what you are trying to do. You have founded an organization. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy is part of our movement. We, after 9/11, many of us got together here in Phoenix and said, you know, terrorism is a symptom. We need to treat the problem. And obviously, we formed this organization believing that we needed to separate mosque and state, and that's our mission statement, that ultimately we can defeat Islamism through the separation of mosque and state, and we do that through a love for our faith from a conservative, family value-oriented standpoint. And we had a rally against terrorism in 2004 that launched us nationally, and then I talk in the book about all of the obstacles that we hit, not only within the Muslim community that was beleaguered with denial and tribalism and a refusal to deal with the issue, but also with the non-Muslims in the media and government and the political correctness atmosphere that basically wanted to marginalize us. And our organization, despite that, has grown to not only thousands of members, but now we have a coalition called the American Islamic Leadership Coalition that includes a number of authors and leaders of organizations that are non-brotherhood. That is a bipartisan coalition of non-Islamists or anti-Islamists in the U.S. and Canada that are basically asking to have a seat at the table of Muslim representation and thought in the West.
All right. I want to continue with you. Again, the book is up at DennisPrager.com. If you have questions for this terrific man, 1-8-PRAGER-776. We are also crossing the Panama Canal, which I have done, but I want to do again because it's unique on Earth to see your ship lifted over land on water. The whole thing will be a terrific trip. Banner is up at DennisPrager.com. My guest is Zuhdi Jasser, an American Muslim physician and courageous man who believes as I do, in fact, I'd say almost exactly as I do, that Islam is indeed viable and can be wonderful if it drops the idea of a Sharia-based society where the individual can observe the Sharia, but the society does not have to. And this is obviously he's in conflict with most traditionalists, though he is himself an observant and believing Muslim. His book is just out, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. There's a real conflict between you and other reformers and groups like CARE. Why does CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, what is your theory? I certainly have my own. Why the media have anointed CARE the spokesman for America's Muslims?
Well, to them, they don't seem to care about this battle between reformists and revivalists, and CARE fits into the revivalists that want to look backwards rather than forward. And because what's happening is, even though Muslims are a quarter of the world's population, in America, since we're 1%, barely 3 or 4 million, they prefer to use Muslims to check off that minority box, that they've protected the minority, and the left is always the savior of discrimination and all these other issues. And, that's basically the need for the Muslim issue, rather than actually looking at whether the laboratory here can function as a place for reform to start, and how allowing the incubation of enclaves of Sharia practice in America actually perpetuates the problem. I mean, there's actually more extremism often in some practices in the West through honor killing or honor abuse than there is in Middle Eastern countries sometimes, because they see what happens when theocrats get in control, and you have 75% of the Egyptian population that don't want Islamists, while here in America, the Islamists get handed our leadership for our community. And when I testify in Congress or try to speak up against them, I'm told that I'm an Uncle Tom, or I had members of Congress interrogating me at the Homeland Security Committee that, well, I'm not qualified, and what gives you your credentials to speak on behalf of Muslims? And they almost sounded like something out of the Iranian theocracy rather than Jeffersonian members of Congress.
Well, what gives it's such an odd question. What gives CARE's leaders the right to represent? I've been on CARE with CARE representatives on television, and it is, they lie. I mean, it's not that they have opinions I strongly differ with. I remember being on with their spokesman, and he said Arab citizens of Israel don't have the right to vote. And I remember I looked at, it was then Hannity and Combs, and I looked at them and I said, the man just lied. It's a blatant, absolute lie. And how many people would know hearing it to call him on it? Very few.
And this is the issue, is that we have been deceived. Many of the left don't care to look through the deception. And the groups like CARE want to do everything possible to soak up that bandwidth of attention to Muslims and Islam with victimization, with, targeting people as Islamophobes the Muslim Public Affairs Council out of LA put out press releases saying I was a Muslim hater, I was a bigot, and my family's getting this stuff, saying you got to be kidding me. These people are just trying to lie and spread libel, rather than actually dealing with the issues that Zuhdi and so many other reformers bring up, because they don't want to address the Islamic State. They don't want to address.
You were called a Muslim hater?
Absolutely. Press release from MPAC in March, just a few months ago, said that Senator McConnell appointed a Muslim hater to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and it's still on their website. It's just crazy. I mean, this is the lies and deception that they use. And every Muslim that knows me in Phoenix, and I talk about this story in the book about how many mosques I've helped build, I've defended in Wisconsin and into Arizona. But, when you take on the agenda of the Islamists who are used to having a monopoly on our community, domestically and globally, they're going to pull out everything they can when they see a real threat which comes from within the community.
Let's go to Pacific Palisades, California. Estella, you're on with Zuhdi Jasser and Dennis Prager. Hi.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you for taking my call. I am married to a Muslim for 30 years, and he belongs into the Ismaili sect. His imam is the Karim Aga Khan, and he always taught his followers to respect and abide by the law of the land, no matter where they are. They consider themselves as a reform form of Islam, and they have always encouraged to be involved in humanitarian work. And as I
are you familiar with this group, Dr. Jasser?
Yeah, absolutely. And their plight, the plight of the Ahmadiyyas and the Ismailis in the Middle East, and especially in the Indo-Pakistani region, I think is very depictive of what happens to Muslim minorities or minority sects within the House of Islam, and how intolerant the Islamic State can be. And many of the work of human rights organizations has been to try to protect the Ismailis and the Ahmadiyyas, which believe in, I'm a traditional Sunni Muslim, but at the end of the day, the Ismailis describe themselves as Muslims. You could compare them to Islam as what Mormons are to Christianity, in that they believe in a messenger that came after the Prophet Muhammad, but still self-describe as Muslims. And one of the things I do as much as I can is to highlight how their treatment is proof positive of the inability of Islamists.
Let me quickly ask you in the few seconds remaining, is there a mosque that you regularly attend?
Yes, here in Scottsdale, Arizona.
And do they share your views?
Oh, no. They've become more conservative. I mean, they're not completely against me, but they certainly don't highlight my work.
I'm sad to hear that. You may have to found your own. God bless you, sir.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. The book is up at DennisPrager.com, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. It is the single most important battle in the world today. That's how important this is. You're listening to The Dennis Prager Show. News coming up.